Hey y'all, today I wanted to talk about stats in Diablo 4 and the stats that I'm looking for and prioritizing on my current Barbarian. It's important to note that the stats that I'm going to go over, while I am going to focus on the ones that I currently am using on my character and stats I'm going to suggest you all use if you decide to run this build as well, a lot of these stats are pretty universal for most builds. Not every stat is good for every single build in the game, obviously, but there are a few very critical stats that most builds are going to want to be using. So even if you aren't playing this build, you can still probably learn some information. There's also a bit of a tip at the end that I wanted to include that I think would help people in terms of trying to be more efficient with their time when they're actually analyzing their gear, because the truth is most gear in this game is terrible, which is kind of the way it is in these kinds of games anyway. So anyway, we'll just roll right into it. I'm going to talk about offensive stats, then defensive stats, and some extra stuff in the end. So, offensive stats are going to be on your weapons, of course, but it's also going to be on your gloves and on your jewelry. So, the big ticket items are going to be crit-related stats. So, crit chance is good. Crit damage is good. Vulnerable damage is also huge. The current state of the game, if you aren't using vulnerable damage, you are playing the game wrong, frankly. Like, once you get to World Tier 3 and World Tier 4, you need to find ways to get vulnerable damage. It's not really related to stats, but I'll just say the exploit glyph, very good. You should be using the exploit glyph. This glyph is actually insane. I would even suggest for most people, put it in your first Paragon board, right? As soon as you get to the glyph socket. Exploit glyph, very good. Use exploit. I'm not using it right now, which I'm not going to go into in the first Paragon board, but use exploit glyph. Very good. Okay, so on my gloves, you're going to be looking, like I said, for crit chance is very huge. Plus 2 skills is also very huge. I have plus 3 to upheaval. It could have been plus 4. Unfortunately, it's not. Plus skills to your main skills are huge because they either make them deal more damage or reduce their cooldown. And related to that, cooldown reduction can actually be a very huge stat in conjunction with having extra skills in on your gear, or just investing like 5 skill points into whatever skill that is. For my Barbarian build, I don't really have a lot of stuff I need cooldown reduction for. Obviously, I have shouts, right? But putting more points in these shouts don't actually make the cooldown lower, so I would need to have like other gear or other glyphs and things like that to help reduce the cooldown. So, but plus upheaval is very good. On my helm, plus to death blow is also enormous, making this a 9 out of 5. I used to have it a 10 out of 5, but some gear changes happened. But making your main damage dealers deal more damage is obviously good. For your weapons, it's, again, basically the same thing. Crit chance is good. Crit damage is good. Vulnerable damage is also really good. Plus to your main stat is also pretty good. I have plus 186 strength, almost max roll this. Pretty good. Your main stat will increase your skill damage. For barbarians, it's going to be strength. Sorcerers and necromancers, they want intelligence. Druids want willpower, and dexterities for rogues. So your main stat, whatever that is an increase to your skill damage. Pretty good. Plus to all stats is also kind of like, it's a halfway point for, dealing more damage, because it does give you more of your main stat. But I think one of the main draws for actually all stats, in my opinion, is that it also makes it way more consistent to get some of your rare nodes in your Paragon board. Like, even this is like, I need 540 willpower, which I don't even have right now. Like, the requirements for the later Paragon boards, the more you attach to your board, the higher these requirements are to get the bonus effects. So I think all stats actually might be useful in that regard to meet like thresholds for stats. Obviously, you wouldn't really want to get much more than that, but these all stats can be kind of a semi-useful stat. Crit strike damage, all stats. These, there's another like category of damage, right? Like damage to close, damage to bleeding, damage to crowd control. Like, these sort of conditional damage effects aren't as good as compared to things like crit damage and vulnerable damage. Attack speed is also a huge stat. I actually don't really have like much attack speed on any of my gear, which is a little unfortunate. So I actually make up for that with some of my legendary aspects to give myself more attack speed, because attack speed is generally good. Again, not every build wants attack speed, but most builds want attack speed. But so damage to close enemies, damage to bleeding, damage to crowd control, like these are just examples of these kind of conditional damage stats aren't as strong as compared to something like crit damage or vulnerable damage. but obviously they're still damage increases, so they're not bad. But if you had a choice, I would go with like crit and vulnerable damage are both like super duper very critical stats on most builds. It's important to know that every weapon type as well has kind of like an implicit modifier of sorts. So for example, on the sword, you can see at the top below the damage per second, it has critical strike damage. The swords are very good because they have critical strike damage. This is even better for like the two-handed sword, which gives you an extra 52% critical strike damage at the top there. Or something like the axes have damage to healthy, which is like decent, but running two swords to have even more crit damage is probably going to be the better choice at the end of the day. I can keep saying it over and over again, but crit is good. Obviously, attack speed is pretty good for most builds. Main stat is good. Vulnerable damage is really good. You really need to capitalize on vulnerable damage when you can. Your amulet is sort of an interesting choice where you can also get plus ranks to passives. I don't know if you can actually get this on any other item type in the game, but I know on amulets for sure you can get plus ranks to passive skills, which is different compared to plus rank to like your normal skills, right? But like my amulet gives me 3 points of heavy-handed, so which gives me even more crit strike damage, which was pretty good. But the other things like physical damage over time is like kind of a whatever stat. But these rings are pretty good. For example, vulnerable damage, good. Crit strike chance is really good. Honestly, I would almost say crit strike chance is like more important than crit damage, because even by default you get a 50% critical damage multiplier. That's like your baseline bonus crit damage. So even getting that base 50% more often is a huge damage increase. Crit is very good for almost every build. But in terms of defensive stats, we're going to transition over to like chest piece, helmet kind of, and legs especially. I want to focus on the pants, because pants are the only item in the game that are purely like your most defensive item that you're going to be equipping. Your pants, you want to really focus on damage reduction. I can't stress enough that damage reduction is by far the best way to stay alive in this game. Damage reduction from enemies that are bleeding. All the enemies I hit are going to be bleeding. Damage reduction while fortified. I'm fortified all the time. Damage reduction from close. I'm a barbarian. Of course they're going to be close to me. Like, damage reduction is so good for actually staying alive. If you feel like you're dying too much, you need damage reduction stats. Resistances are frankly useless. No one cares about resistances. They're terrible. I'm not kidding. Don't worry about resistances. They're not good. I promise. They're not, right now, at least if you're watching this video when it's relatively recent, when I uploaded it, resistances are not going to be good. Even the devs know that they're not going to be good, but they're not even going to look into trying to change that until a bit later on down the line. So damage reduction is definitely the way to go for staying alive. Max life is also really good. So this helmet has 1,120 max life, which is a lot of max life when I only have 6,938. I can even show that in the defensive list here, my base life is 5,170. And then I get that extra 1,120. That's kind of a lot, like 1,000 plus on top of my 5,000 base. It's like, that's a lot of life just in one stat. Percentage to max life is not as good in comparison, but plus to max life is a very nice way of having just more life. If you want to have more HP, go get plus to max life. Don't really worry about the percentage increase to max life. You want to have plus max life. My chest piece, damage reduction from close enemies. Now you need to kind of ask yourself how much you want to focus on damage versus defensive stats. Damage is kind of a premium stat in comparison to defensives, just since damage reduction is just such a crazy good stat for keeping yourself alive. So like your chest piece and your helmet can have defensive stats, but you kind of want to make sure that they still are also doing some offensive stuff for you. Like even my amulet have damage reduction while fortified, which is nice, but I almost wonder, would that be better if I was like maybe plus to strength or plus to crit damage or plus to vulnerable damage? Like that would probably be a more ideal stat to have on my amulet, for example. But if you are struggling with staying alive, look at your pants. Try and get new pants, okay? Try and get damage reduction. Again, resistances suck. You do not want resistances. They are terrible. They don't do anything for you. They don't literally do nothing, but they're so far and away way worse than damage reduction. And when you're slotting in gems into your gear, you also want to either use these blue topaz gems, damage reduction while fortified. This is pretty true for like barbarians and druids that often have really easy ways to generate fortify and be fortified. Otherwise, you're going to want to grab the topaz gems. I wish they were in my inventory, but we'll just show them off real quick. Topaz gems are going to be your damage reduction while while control impaired. When you get higher and higher levels in this game, most of your deaths are going to be because you got CC chained because you were frozen and then you were stunned and then you were knocked down and then you died. Crowd control in this game is bonkers. Like, there are some elite packs that will literally just dumpster truck you because you just got CC'd for like 5 whole seconds and died. So these topaz can be huge ways to mitigate dying to crowd control. Okay, so if you aren't using fortify, maybe your class doesn't really have fortify, like sorcerers, rogues, and necromancers don't really have fortify from my understanding very easily, at least. But druids and barbarians definitely have ways to fortify. So I think I said the wrong gem earlier. The blue gem, the sapphire gem. I think I said the wrong gem name earlier, whatever. And in terms of your offensive gems as well, I would probably go with crit strike damage to vulnerable enemies, just to really capitalize on vulnerable damage. You could consider sapphire gems, critical strike damage to crowd control enemies. This is also a decent option. The reason I don't pick this is because bosses in dungeons, world bosses, things like that, they are not crowd controlled unless they are like completely staggered. Like the stagger meter's full and they're like kind of incapacitated for a few seconds, right? So these sapphire gems don't do anything for me on like bosses, right? So I would rather have something more universally useful like damage to vulnerable as compared to crit strike damage to crowd control enemies, but this is definitely not a bad option though. The other kind of like maybe stat you could consider on your gear is going to be lucky hit chance. There are some pretty good lucky hit effects in the game. A lot of them are not very good. You might have some lucky hit effects on your skill tree as well. There are some builds that do try and utilize lucky hit effects. So if you do have a build like that, then lucky hit chance, just increases to lucky hit chance, are going to be pretty good for you. So definitely consider that if that is something that's relevant for your build. That should be kind of everything overview-wise for your gear. One thing I kind of forgot to go over real quick is your boots as well. In my opinion, movement speed is huge. Being able to just move faster is not only more efficient for just playing the game in general, but it also means it's a bit easier to dodge attacks from enemies, get out of AoEs and things like that. So movement speed is pretty good. So the last thing that I wanted to talk about was when you have a situation like this. You see my inventory so far in this video is completely full, okay? I ran a couple of dungeons before I recorded this footage so far, and I was going to show you kind of the process of determining whether or not to keep any of this stuff, right? Because you don't want to be looking at your gear and be like, oh, okay, this thing has damage to crowd control, all stats, damage over time, core skill damage. Is that really what I want? I don't know. And you're mulling around. If you do that for every single item in your inventory, you're going to be wasting so much time, okay? Here's the truth. Most of the loot that you pick up in this game is going to suck, especially like after like level 50. Like most of your gear is just not going to be very good. So for me, being in world tier 4, if my items that I pick up are not at least item power 800, I don't care. Straight up, I don't care. Doesn't matter what the stats are on it, I don't care. Right? Almost every item I'm actually using is at least 800 power. Here's what I do, right? I look at the items. Okay, we'll ignore the legendaries for now. I look at the items. You see the item power at the top of the item card here? If it's not 800, I literally don't care. Don't care. Don't care. 768, no. 761, no. All sacred items at World Tier 4 are completely useless. They are going to be terrible. Guaranteed. They will not have as high of an item power compared to ancestral items. An item power is a pretty direct correlation for how good its like base stats are, right? And for weapons, that includes like its damage per second, as well as how high like the stats can roll, for example, on gear as well. So 655, no. 724, no. 795 is high, but it doesn't really have this. It does have actually pretty good stats. It's attack speed, crit strike chance, but I also don't use double swing. This could be a maybe. This is a kind of a maybe pick. Maybe I'll mess around with this. I actually might keep that. I haven't actually even looked at this gear. Okay, I'm doing this in real time. Sacred item, no. 785, no, not good enough. No, no. 681, no. 637, no. 784, no. No, 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 no. 813, very high item power. Damage, injured, close, and berserking. But that strength roll is not huge, okay? I can maybe get this up, but I'd have to consider I do lose all stats, and I would have to roll crit strike damage. So this is one of those things you have to kind of make the decision about if it's an upgrade or not, and every individual case is going to be unique depending on if upgrading this thing would even be worth my time. So I don't know. I don't think I would use this, but it did have a very high item power, so it is at least a consideration, but I don't think I'm going to use it. This is $7.99. Could be good. Don't think it is. $7.95. Does have vulnerable damage, but I'm going to pass. $7.86, no. Sacred item, no. No, 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 right? So even normally, if I'm like just playing by myself, like me talking out loud and like explaining my decisions, I wouldn't even be doing that. I would just be looking at it and trying making decisions on the fly, because I don't want to be worrying about all this other gear. You see how much of this I don't even care about? Even these legendaries. It's like, when it comes to legendary items, if the item power is too low, I then look at the legendary effect, and if the legendary effect is not like at or a max roll of a legendary power, I don't care. And even this legendary effect, I don't care about. I don't need that. Call the Ancients one? No. This is a sacred item. No. It could have been 16%, but it was 11% on the legendary power. No. No, that didn't max roll. This is like a minimum roll. No, right? You see how, like, of all of these, I only got 2, and these might not even be upgrades. Like, most of this is trash, okay? So most of the gear you pick up is going to suck. So you just get rid of it and you just go sell it all. Or you can salvage it. But most people are going to be selling things because you don't really need to salvage gear in the end game, to be honest. So, anyway, yeah. Try and have a minimum threshold for like how good your gear is. If you're still in World Tier 3, I would go with around 700 item power is like a really good, like high item power for sacred items is like close to 700. And then for World Tier 4 ancestral items, you want to be close to 800 or higher. Anyway, that's stats and as well as a quick overview on trying to quickly look through your gear. The faster you can get at looking through your gear, the less time you'll be wasting in town, and so you can go back to killing monsters and getting even more gear and more XP in dungeons and stuff. So anyway, thank you all for watching. If you got any questions, leave them in the comments. I'll probably be streaming if you're watching this on the day it goes live on this Saturday. Come hang about my stream if you want. Otherwise, thank you for watching. Have a wonderful day.